Good morning, folks. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Richard Massey, and today we're going to be looking at one of my all-time favorite cameras. As you may recall, my favorite format it used to be a 35 millimeter, that 2:3 aspect ratio, but I've moved up to a large medium format, and it shoots the same aspect ratio, but it's much larger, and it's 6 by 9 centimeters. It's 2¼ by 3¼ and presents some awesome quality. It's a big camera, and it's the Fuji GSW690, and we're going to take a closer look at that. But a lot of people have been asking, I have a little workshop going up here in Virginia City. Folks have been asking me, why do you want to use this particular camera? And the reason is, well, primarily because the quality is so outstanding. With that massive 6 by 9 centimeter format on a 120 film, it gives really excellent quality. The lens is superior. It's a 65 millimeter, and that's pretty darn wide. So this camera that came out in a version that is also uses a 90 millimeter lens, but for me that's a little too long, too narrow view. But with this I can do some really outstanding architectural work, and of course with that, if you want to shoot vertical shots of buildings, the key is you have to keep the film plane parallel with the front of the building. As soon as you tilt up, now you're going to cut off the top of it, so it's going to introduce some keystoning. So if you keep it straight like this, you may not see all of the top of the building if you have like the longer lens, but with this I can usually get the tops of the buildings and crop off just the bottom section a little bit. So I really love it for architectural work, and we're up in Virginia City today, and we're photographing some of the old buildings and some of the trains. It's a fantastic place to visit. I highly recommend you come on up here. There's so much to see and do and photograph, and be sure to go on that Virginia Truckee Railroad. The train ride is a lot of fun for everybody in the family. But here today we're going to be taking mostly black and white pictures. I like to use an orange filter with my black and white film, and I use the slower 120 films normally, and get some pretty good quality. Now occasionally I'll switch over. When I shoot color, I'll do the Velvia 50 if it's kind of overcast day, not too bright, not too contrasty, and the Velvia 50 has a pretty good contrast to it, fantastic rich color saturation, but the latitude isn't really very wide. So on days like on a bright sunny day, I'll switch over and I'll use the Provia. Has a little longer latitude, it's a little flatter film, but still has wonderful colors. And as you know, any transparency film has zero grain, so you can make huge enlargements, particularly with the large 6 by 9 centimeter. That gives you some outstanding quality. So we'll take a little closer look at the camera and see what it looks like. Yeah, this beautiful Fuji GSW690 is the version 2. They came out with a later one that's version 3, and it has a spirit level on the top for keeping things perfectly level. But I just use a leveler on the top here when I'm shooting. One of the things I love about this is a rangefinder camera. If you haven't tried that, it's a little different than what you're used to if you're using a digital SLR where you're actually looking through the lens, because the viewing is a little offset. What you see through the rangefinder, the viewfinder here, is not exactly what you're seeing through the lens, and so for some people that takes a little getting used to. But this particular viewfinder is absolutely easy to use. It's so bright and so large. It's the best I've ever used, and I used a lot of Leicas. Of course, those are rather small. And in fact, this is called a Texas Leica because it's shaped very much like the Leica, except it's about 4 times as big and is about heavy. And this thing was made in 1992, and still outperforms any digital camera, even those big digital backs, because the image size is so large, and when it's scanned down, it's actually about 50% larger than the size of a Hasselblad, which is a 6 by 6. And you'd have to have a 250 megabyte digital back to match this after this thing is scanned. This has a built-in lens shade. For some people that's a little bit of a issue, because if they want to use the polarizing filters and other square filters, it can be a little bit of an issue because you'd have to push this back and then adjust and then do your settings. But this thing is very accurate, and it's very easy to use. It is so easy to hold on to. It's very comfortable in your hands, but a little heavy if you want to hang it around your neck. It does have a couple different ways to put your strap, but I never do that. I have a handle I have here. I usually have it on tripod, actually, or you can hang your strap this way. And it works out fine, but after an hour or so hiking around, this thing would be a little heavy because it is 3 pounds, and but can't beat the quality. So let's take a close-up look at it now, and we'll see the different features. Okay, now let's take a look at the front of this beautiful camera. You'll see it's got the 65mm lens, and it's got that beautiful coating, the EBC Fujinon coating. And this is 5.6 lens, and it has a built-in lens shade. Slides out. That allows you to see the f-stops and the shutter speeds, and you adjust those by moving these dials on the sides of the lens. It goes from 22 to 5.6, and for shutter speeds it goes to time all the way down to, or up to, 500th of a second. So it's very adequate for this size camera. Smooth focusing ring. Shows your settings. You have a depth of field scale up here. You can see the markings on that. And the rangefinder, the viewfinder through here, as we mentioned, it's a large, very bright rangefinder, one of the best you'll ever find. It has the ability to fire the camera on 3 ways. One, a cable release that could be screwed into the top right here, or you can just push that button down, or you can push this button down. Might be a little easier for some people when they're shooting in a vertical mode to use this one. And there's a locking device under here to slide that off and on to release the lock. And that's pretty much it for the front, except over here we have, under this little cover, pull that up, and there's a PC cord if you want to attach your flash unit there. Other way you can fire off a flash is to put it in the hot shoe. It actually works as a hot shoe up here. I usually use that to put my leveling device in there. Since this doesn't have the built-in spirit level on it, I use this little attachment here. Slides right in, and very accurate vertical, horizontal bubbles there. And as we mentioned, it's got the lugs for mounting the neck strap if you would carry it that way. It's got a beautiful handle here that makes it very comfortable to hold in your hand, carry around. And so now let's look at the top of this. By the way, a school bus pulled up down the street here a little bit, so we might be having some noise in the background. Please excuse that. But anyhow, we'll take a look at the top of this camera. We see the identifying marker here, the hot shoe. Slides, the flash slides right in there. And because this is a leaf style shutter, you can sync your flash all the way up to 1/500th of a second. That is the fastest that this lens will go. With most conventional cameras, you can only do like 125th or maybe 250 on some of the modern digital SLRs. But for this, and like the Hasselblad and those that have the leaf shutter, you can sync all the way up to 500th of a second. By the way, while we're looking at this lens, the camera has a fixed lens. It's not a zoom lens. It's not an interchangeable lens. This is a 65mm, and as I mentioned earlier, there is a version that is a 90mm, but I much prefer this little wider angle, and it's a lot easier to use, a lot more versatile. Moving right along, you see the indicator here. These are the settings. You'll see it's now turned to 120, and you get 8 exposures on this big 120 film. Now, they used to make a 220 film. I don't think you can find that anymore. And then, of course, you'd get double the amount, 16 exposures. A lot of people are confused about what this is. That's a 4 exposure, 120. Well, actually, one of the main reasons this camera was manufactured and is primarily used for the tour industry in Japan, when they would have these big tour buses pull up at these amusement parks and special events, there'd be photographers with one of these cameras, and they would have these short rolls of 120 and 4 exposures. So they'd shoot 4 exposures, run right off and get it developed right away, so the folks after their tour would have an opportunity to see their pictures and make some purchases. This, of course, here is the counter. It shows you how many frames you've shot. This is a double stroke lever here that 2 times, and it'll advance the film where you want it to be. And the release here, as I mentioned, you can put a shutter release, a cable, screw it in there, or just do it manually. And okay, now I'd like to point out a few things as we look at the back of this. Of course, we have this rubber eye cup over the viewing window. Makes it a lot more comfortable, especially if you're wearing glasses. And you'll see this actually part of the top of the camera, but I wanted to point out what a smooth, silky smooth film advance. This is the best I've ever used on any camera. Next, you'll see this little holder. This is where you put the tab from the film that you're using as a reminder. You go out in the field and tear off the back part of the box, put it in there, and so you'll know exactly what film you had in here last time. And of course, we have the serial plate there. This has no battery in it. It's completely manual in every sense of the word, and that's one of the things I love about it. It's just you never have to worry about going out in the field and having to replace batteries or get charged up. And electronics, as you know, can always add a little bit of complications as far as additional problems. So less can go wrong with this than anything that's got electronics in it. So, okay, now looking at the bottom of the camera, of course, the bottom plate. This is a locking device for the spool. The film holder goes in the inside here, and that locks that in place. And this is the take-up spool lock here. Of course, the tripod mounting socket here, and a counter. This is an extremely low count of 94, and so that will, I think you're supposed to multiply that times 10, give you the number of rolls that I've actually gone through this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll find out and put a notice up there for you. Very nice focusing ring, manual focusing, of course, on all this. And as I was asked just a moment ago, what kind of material is this made out of? It looks like it's plastic, but it's actually a very good quality plastic over a metal frame. So I think it's aluminum, very light for its size actually, even though it is 3 pounds, but extremely sturdy, very rugged, and tremendous optics. Of course, as we mentioned, it doesn't have interchangeable lenses. Fuji made a previous model that was a Fuji 6, I think they call it, but it had interchangeable lenses, but it had a 6x6 format, just like a Hasselblad, square images, and you get 12 shots on a roll as opposed to 8 on this. By the way, there is another version of this that takes it's a 6x7 format instead of 6x9. For those that like the supposedly ideal format, that works out to be like an 8x10 or 4x5 format. But this is more akin to like a magazine cover, or a little wider for a panorama, not a panorama, but a general scenery shot. It's a little wider. It's the same format as we mentioned, same as the 35mm 2x3 aspect ratio. And of course the lens shade that moves in and out. And let's take another closer look at that lens and how those controls work. A little hard to see, but on each side, 2 little nubs here sticking out, and as you change those, you can change the f-stops. Just on top of that, 2 little knobs sticking out here, and you can adjust the shutter speeds. A lot easier to do when you do both fingers here, but it's a little clumsy trying to do it in front of the camera, keeping my fingers out of the way. Now, on the front of the lens, the base of the lens here, as you dip the field scale, it's kind of like on the Hasselblad and some of the better cameras, where you can get an idea of what all is going to be in focus when you have your lens set at a set distance. Say, for example, we had this set at 5 meters. We can see what f-stop we're using. Let's say we're going to use f16, and our subject is 5 feet. So we'll look here at f16. We'll see that's one range, f16 over here. So now everything past infinity, actually, to 2.5 meters is going to be in focus. Now, what I like to do is tell folks, look, anything in between the 16 is going to be in focus. So do you want to favor the distance, or do you want to favor something in the foreground? Now, we know that if we shift this 5 meters over towards the 16 here, now that 5 meter subject is still going to be in sharp focus, but now we're inside of 2 meters here. So almost 1.5 meters to infinity, or to past 5 meters is going to be in focus. So play around and adjust that, because it's really, I see a lot of people, they're shooting at, they just set it at infinity. Sure, everything in infinity is going to be fine, but at f16, up to 5 meters will be in focus to infinity. We just kind of wasted all this out here. So if we were to shift it the other way, just take infinity over towards f16, and now we bring the foreground in focus. And the opposite is true. If you want to throw the background out of focus or whatever, this gives you, it's a valuable tool. Experiment with that, learn to play with it, and you really increase your quality of your images by allowing you to control, either favor the foreground or favor the background. So I hope that helps you. Try it out. Let's take a look at the inside of this, and I'll show you how it's loaded. Remember, I showed you previously, there's 2 little knobs here you can turn and then pop out. It pulls down here, and this is where your film will be inserted. It pulls across here over to your take-up reel. You can see as we turn that, it will pull the film across, and there's a marker right up here, and that's where the arrow will be. You'll advance until you see this big arrow going across the film, up and down there, and then close it, and you're good to go. This is the 1/20th pressure plate. You can adjust that for 220, but since they don't make 220 film anymore, it's kind of a moot point. But actually, you can use 35 millimeter in here. They make an adapter, not Fuji, but second market. You can get a little adapter, so you can set a 35 millimeter roll in there, and you get quite a long panorama. It's pretty impressive. But some folks like that, but I haven't really tried it, because I'm always worried about the flatness of the field there, but it'd be interesting to experiment with that. Well, I hope you found something of value in this little video today. If you're interested in getting one of these older cameras, I would sure recommend it, because these hold their value, unlike the newer cameras that are obsolete as soon as well, a couple months down the road, there's always a new model coming out. But these old cameras have already taken their depreciation, and in some cases, these are going up in value. This costs $400 to $500 for this beautiful camera, but you could use this for years, and you might find that it's gone up in value, or at least you'll get your money back out of it, because there's a resurgence now in film photography, and it's great fun to see so many young people actually becoming better photographers and understanding how photography really works, how the cameras function, and this will make you a better photographer. Even if you're doing digital, shoot film occasionally, because, you know, as I tell my students, if you shoot film, you're going to be thinking a lot about what you're doing. You're going to be working slower, so you're going to think a lot, you're going to shoot less. Well, with digital, it's just the opposite. You think very, very little, and you shoot a whole lot because you think, well, I can just delete it or throw it out. And so you develop a real sloppy way of thinking and approaching your scene. So you become a much better photographer. A lot of the professionals that I know occasionally take like a little holiday and shoot with just film for a while, and they come back all refreshed. And even when they're shooting digital out of necessity for their assignments, some of their fine artwork and some of their shoots that they do just for joy is done with these film cameras. So again, thanks for joining us, and I hope that you'll tune in next time. If you like what you've seen, give it a thumbs up and think about subscribing. Till next time, bye-bye.